Welcome to Crossroad Connection. We're speaking out for those left unheard. My name is David Schering. I'm the president of Crossroad Bible Institute and the host of your program. We're talking about something today that's very close to the hearts of many people, but unfortunately for many others, not even on their radar, and that is the issue of racial reconciliation. And we have an expert today on this issue of racial reconciliation, Zakiya Jackson. Welcome to the program, Zakiya.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here. You are currently working with the DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And before we jump into the subject of today, an important one, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? What is that leadership initiative about?
Yeah, we work with urban youth workers, so youth pastors and people who work for nonprofits maybe or parachurch organizations working with urban children and youth, maybe up through college as well. And the DeVos family back in the mid-90s decided that they were really passionate about urban youth and wanted to see how they could help them, particularly as it pertains to education and the other resources that urban youth often lack. And they decided that the best way to do that would be to support the people who are already doing that work.
Indigenous population.
Well, yeah. Indigenous population and even just people who are already working with young people.
Okay.
People who are already doing the work because they're the experts, the people who have been doing it. But there's such a high turnover rate in youth work, period, but particularly urban youth work.
Sure. Well, even the average church, they say a youth worker lasts for about a year. So and with the pressures of urban life, it's even more difficult.
Absolutely. With my own background in youth work, I know, I understand intimately. So the family decided to come alongside urban youth workers and help them to personally and professionally have a more sustainable way of life, if you will. And so that's when, I guess we started late 90s is when the program first started. I think in January we will begin our 18th or 19th round of training. So we train in 5 cities a year.
Different cities across the country? Across
the country, who come from different organizations within their city. So for example, this year, 2 of our cities are Atlanta and Newark. So 10 to 12 people who do youth work, they've been nominated, they've interviewed, they've had recommendations written. So they've been proven as people who are doing good work in the city.
Quickly, this is to help urban youth leaders. So it's providing them with tools, encouragement, principles, guidelines, I mean, all the above?
Yeah, all the above. We focus on helping them manage their personal lives even more because often they're working to the max, they're working long hours, or they're isolated in what they're doing. So we have 5 core values that we really stress: balance, accountability, interdependence, collaboration. I'm forgetting one of them, but that's from the personal side. And then on the professional side, in the ministry side, we work on how to collaborate with other organizations, how to define and fund resources in a way that perhaps they haven't thought about before. Systems thinking, scenario planning, other tools to help them execute better what they're already doing well.
And the ultimate goal of this is to strengthen, build up the youth in the inner cities.
That's right.
They have specific challenges of poverty, broken families, poor education. Am I missing anything?
There's all sorts of things that are that typify poverty, but a lot of housing transition. Their students might, and they themselves might live in an area that's a food desert. They're probably in some ways dealing with issues of mass incarceration with their families.
Sure.
We're also finding that gentrification is redistributing poverty. So sometimes there might not be the common core in the city that people are used to, because of housing being torn down. Students may be in the suburbs, but it doesn't mean they have the affluence of the suburbs.
Right. Some unintended consequences there, I think, with renewing inner cities. Huh?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, this is exciting. I'm sure we could spend the whole time talking about this program, but let's approach the topic of the hour,
Yes.
racial reconciliation.
Yeah.
First of all, how is that important to your work?
It's important to not only the work that I do professionally, but as a volunteer. I'm what someone from church calls a high-capacity volunteer. At my church, I go to Madison Square, and also
I know Dave Beal in there.
Yeah.
We have staff that go to Madison. Great church.
Yes, it's a great church, and even through the Christian Community Development Association, I'm very involved. And when we look at issues of poverty, period, no matter what kind of work you're doing in it, there's going to be a call or a need for racial reconciliation in some form. Because much of what we experience or see in poverty is the result of systemic oppression and systemic racism, which is this huge in the clouds sort of thing.
Right. Now, let's just hit it straight on.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to have viewers that are saying, "Well, what do you mean? There's no problem with race."
Yeah.
You know, we solved all that back in the civil rights movement, right?
Right.
There's no need for racial reconciliation. It's just maybe economic issues. How do you respond to that?
You know, I respond to that with saying, one, I don't blame you for thinking that. I don't think that people who think that are bad people or love the Lord less or anything like that. It used to not be something that I thought about as much as I do now, because sometimes Black, white, Asian, Indian, whatever ethnicity or race you are, it is easier to live outside of that realm. And it is easier to not understand it until you've been forced to, if you will. But when you work day in, day out in impoverished situations, or even it's not always related to poverty, when you see treatment that is steadily different, there are some conclusions that you have to draw. So for people who don't see that and it's not apparent to, my urge to them would just to be start listening and talking to people who do believe systemic racism occurs. Ask them why and ask for their personal stories and maybe read something by in the article or a magazine called The Atlantic. They have a lot of different articles in there that would be so helpful.
Isn't part of the problem that evangelicals, Christians, many Christians, when they think about evil and wrong, they tend to look at it in terms of the heart, personal level. But they don't necessarily see evil in the systemic sense. That there can, so sometimes it's the idea I hear out there, we'll just change people's hearts and the systems will change themselves. How do you respond?
I would say, I didn't hear Dr. King say that. I didn't hear so many of the leaders that we espouse to of all races, that we have respect for here in this country, say that. I think that it's so easy. Just yesterday I was reading Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And it was so intriguing. I was reading it because of all the things that have been going on with Ferguson this last couple weeks in Missouri, the riots and the fighting and the death of unarmed Black males. And in Dr. King's letter, he talks about strategic nonviolence, and he talks about the importance of raising the level of tension, that we need tension to be raised. We need people to feel uncomfortable and to not be sure about what's going on. But I think in evangelical Christianity, we often want to say that loving Jesus means we should all be calm and that we should not get riled up and get upset about these race things because it just causes more trouble. And I don't see the word saying that. I don't see Christian leaders that we...
Jesus threw some chairs around once in a while.
Yeah, he threw some chairs around. He got, as the young people will say, he got real hype.
He did.
Towards the causes of injustice. When I read Isaiah 57 and 58 and 59, there's so much talk about justice. We need to feel the tension, and then we need to know how to steward that tension well, I think. But we're so scared of it in the church.
After the break, I want to approach this issue from the perspective of a divided America, two Americas that our viewers may not be aware of. We'll be right back after this.
Stay connected to what's happening at Crossroad Bible Institute with Crossroad Network News. This free magazine is designed to keep you informed and inspired about what Christ Church is doing in prisons and jails. If you'd like a free subscription to Crossroad Network News, fill out the form online by visiting us at cbi.fm.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. My name is David Scheringa, and I'm speaking with Zakiya Jackson about racial reconciliation. Zakiya has a lot of experience in terms of working with urban youth and developing urban leadership through the DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative. And so we're tackling this very important issue, I believe, because we're a prison ministry. We have 45,000 students. The largest number of our students are people of color. And also the largest percentage of people in prison are people of color. Mm-hmm. Now let me ask you an insulting question. Mm-hmm. I was discussing this with an evangelical leader at one time, a pretty well-known person. I said that, I think 65% of people in prison are African American, another 25% are Hispanic, and it's all people of color. And I said, why? And we're going to get at the systemic thing with this. I said, why do you think that is? You want to know what his answer was? Well, people of color commit more crimes. And I said, is it possible that more people of color are targeted, and because they tend to be poor, are easily convicted because they can't afford the defense attorney to get off, because going into the urban centers is for the police is like shooting fish in a barrel, rather, aren't those all systemic issues? And what would you like to say to that leader?
Yeah, I would even just talk to him about the things that I've seen personally. I always like to give people resources as well, so I tell him to watch The House I Live In. It's a documentary about exactly what you're talking about. I would explain to him that people of color are given far harsher penalties. So even aside from the issue of not being able to afford the best legal defense,
Coke versus
penalties,
crack,
right?
For
Coke
example.
versus crack, for example. Given much harsher penalties. I would talk about how I went to a very affluent undergraduate university, and I saw or heard of peers of mine, in terms of all being at the university, who were not people of color doing crimes that involve drugs, but they have a safety net, right? They have a protection around them. They have parents who will not let them go to jail for the most part.
They'll mortgage they'll mortgage the house if they need to get a proper defense.
They'll mortgage a house. Yeah. They'll call in a favor. Yeah. They'll, whatever it is.
Rich people in general don't go to jail.
And I think there's so many people who say, well, I'm not rich. Understanding even the difference between middle class and even understanding the difference between middle class people of color and middle class white Americans, often, even if I'm middle class, often there still are different safety nets. It's not as easy for my mother to call in a favor as it would be for some of my peers, who on paper we might look the same because we're both middle class, we went to a similar high school, so on and so forth. So that really digs into the heart of systemic racism. And to really, this summer I read something that just kind of blew my mind. It was about housing discrimination in Chicago and in the Midwest and other places. And back in the, I want to say 40s and 50s, when African Americans were first starting to buy houses in larger numbers after migration up north, there was such a clear, disparate housing discrimination. It resulted in black families having to have 2 or 3 different jobs in order just to pay their mortgage. That makes a difference on the family, the quality of family time, the quality of life, how much you're watching your kids, what are your kids doing, all of those things. So I would encourage that leader to, I wouldn't shame them, but I would encourage them to dig into, there might be some things you're unaware of. There might be some things that you haven't considered in this topic.
Well, the way I like to explain it is at that Crossroad here, for example, we want to change sinful hearts so people make better choices, but also sinful systems were also created by sinful hearts.
Right.
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 And so we have to have a 2-pronged approach.
Right.
Because we feel that we can spend 10 years, we have a 10-year discipleship program for people in prison, but then when they get out into society, they face such hurdles, they can't put into practice the stuff that we taught them, you know, so we owe it to them to make those changes, and that's why we emphasize social justice. Now, to get at this from yet another angle for our viewers, because maybe I'm making some folks uncomfortable out there, you know, we might be, but that's good. People, you know, we should make people uncomfortable. But I learned this by personal experience. I don't have time to get into this right now, but okay, we think about the Ferguson riots, and that just blows my mind, because I was in high school during the civil rights movement, and I saw on television the police hosing down students and the inner cities on fire and so forth, and you thought it just brings back nightmares of that. How is that possible? But really, I think that things like the Ferguson riots are kind of the front lines of what I call the Great Divide of 2 Americas. And what it seems to me, and maybe you can kind of embellish on this a bit, and I discovered this firsthand. When I think about the police, I have good thoughts. They're my protectors. They protect my stuff, you know? And I see them as the good guys. But my African American minister friends say that's not how it is for their community. And stories that I have heard, and I don't think that they're exaggerations, stories that I have heard from African Americans and other minorities and how they experience the police sounds like my mother-in-law's teenage stories when she was in the Netherlands and it was occupied by the Nazis, where it's survival. They're not there to protect you, you know. Am I exaggerating?
You're not. I really appreciate something that you said as you shared that story. You said, and I don't think they're exaggerations. I think that a lot of times, I have a lot of friends who are not people of color, who are white, and I think that sometimes they want to believe the things that they're hearing are just kind of gross exaggerations. And so I appreciate you saying that, because I think part of what we're going to have to do is why don't you just try to believe it? I'm not saying at the end of the day that has to be your conclusion, but ask questions and press into it as if it were real, as if it was something that happened to you. But I would definitely say that's true. It's interesting, in all the racial reconciliation conversations I have and conversations with people who are passionate on this topic of many races, I came to realize that a lot of my friends who are white, they don't know about my inner world and the things that I have to think about as an African American, because I never thought to tell them, never thought, for one, that they might be interested. But as I get older and get more involved in this topic, I start to share it more and say things like, I can't go to such and such place by myself because I am black, because it might not be safe. And I'm not a poor black person, and I'm not, I'm not what you might think is the people that should be afraid, that respectability, politics kinds of things. I am fearful because I've been told there are places that I can't go by people of both races. It's real. When I first moved to Michigan, I was at a wedding in East Michigan, and I was the only African American at the party. It was fun. I wasn't worried about it. I knew a lot of the bride and her family. I was really enjoying it. And this woman who had had more to drink than she maybe should have says to me, "We don't hurt black people around here." And I, was shocked and amazed. And I said, "What? What did you say?" And she said it again. "We don't hurt black people around here." And then she started talking about other counties nearby that did. Whew, that's the reality of being black in America, even in the North,
Yes, it is. And we're going to come back because there's so much more we have to talk about right after this message.
Correcting Bible study lessons is crucial to helping inmates. To partner with CBI in this safe and secure role, please visit us at cbi.fm on the web.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. My name is David Shurinka, talking to Zakira Jackson. We're discussing a very touchy subject that we need racial reconciliation. How do we begin to to bring those two Americas together? When a policeman stops me, I'm not worried. In fact, we'll have a nice chat. The most annoying thing that could happen, maybe I'll get a ticket. I usually always get a warning. He's not going to ask me to get out of my car. He's not going to ask me to search my car. He's not going to ask. I wouldn't know how to spread them. You know what I mean? That's probably different for you and some of your friends. When the police stops you, there's a concern. Anything could happen, and that's that two Americas. And I'm just using that one example about how we experience the police as protection or as oppressors. How do we begin? And that's what your job is, to bring reconciliation. How do we ever cross that great divide? A divide that, by the way, goes back generations. I mean, I can trace my ancestry back to when the Heidelberg Catechism was written. That they were, so I have had hundreds of years of privilege, whereas most African Americans, they trace their roots back through the Jim Crow laws, back to the plantations, to slave ownership, where the law was capricious, whatever the slave owner wanted. How in the world can reconciliation ever happen? It seems impossible.
It does seem impossible sometimes. The last couple of weeks, I've just been really heavy with it. I think there's kind of two answers to that question.
Okay.
One is very much a spiritual answer. I think in the church, if we are to be leaders in this call, which I think we should be, this call to reconciliation, I actually think it kind of starts at a very basic core heart level in our own personal walks with the Lord. Because if we are reconciled to God and we have a good understanding, I'm talking about people who are already Christians, but we have a good understanding of what it means to be reconciled to God, and we have a good understanding of our identity and our place in Christ, it allows us to be able to have conversations about reconciliation that are uncomfortable. But I have found that so many people are so uncomfortable that we can't even have the conversation in a meaningful way.
Uncomfortable in the sense of get defensive, angry, what?
Get defensive, angry, or, in West Michigan,
denial.
People are really nice, so it's more denial than the anger that I have experienced here.
There's a reason we call this Jerusalem, right?
But it's, so-and-so didn't mean that. Regardless of whether they meant it, it's not good, and we need to talk about it. But there's a real resistance when I try to have conversations. And I do think that keeps coming back to identity and how we see the Lord and how we see relationships. And so I almost feel like to start off conversations with about racial reconciliation in the church, it has to start with your reconciliation to God.
So every person has to check their own hearts.
Yeah.
What's the second thing?
Yeah. The second thing is we actually need to act and do and go. So we need to be open to things like protest or to saying, you know what, I'm not going to be a part of this organization because of how they're treating African Americans, or I'm really concerned in Grand Rapids. I'm really concerned about the police in Grand Rapids, so I'm going to go talk. Or I know that Representative Amash has town hall meetings coming up, going to town hall meetings and talking about things that we're concerned about.
Shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, I think we need, and I think that is difficult because any action on something that people are uncomfortable about is perceived as aggressive. Just because I am acting doesn't mean I'm being aggressive, but I think that's the perception.
And throwing out labels like entitlement or something like that, right?
Right.
That's always nice to have labels like that.
Yeah.
How can people, and our time is running out, but how can people experience the reality of racial reconciliation from a non-minority side? Mm-hmm. I had a tendency, I think, for many years to think it's not about race, it's about economics. Mm-hmm. And economics do enter in because you can have some white folks who are poor and experience some of the same kinds of difficulties and so forth. But then I was at a conference where I was speaking down in Nashville, and I was the only white person there. The rest, it was all a pastor's conference. Mm-hmm. And I hitched a ride back to the hotel with 4 African American pastors who I'd kind of become buddies with, at the conference, and a police car was following us, and it kept following us. Mm-hmm. We turned the corner, and it kept following us, and I was getting worried for the first time in my life, like, what's with this? It wasn't a junky car. The tags weren't expired. It was a rental car. And this police car kept following us. And then I just kept looking. And then my pastor friend says, Dave, stop looking back. He said, just look straight forward. He says, we got this covered. We've been here before. That was a wake-up call, And I think the problem is it has to be something more than, just spiritual or intellectual. Somehow we have to experience, because I didn't know what I was going to do if that cop pulled us over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just comment on that? How can people, don't they have to experience it somehow before and get a wake-up call? Or am I exaggerating again,
I don't think you're exaggerating. I do think experience is important. I think the miss comes when people try to force experiences.
Okay, right.
So when people target me that I'm going to be their new black friend,
yeah.
Or when people,
mine was totally unplanned, had no idea it was coming.
Right, but something about you makes people think that you are safe, that you are someone who can be welcomed into a all minority environment, that you have something to say or something to offer. And my guess would be that part of that has to do with you being able to listen. I assume that you listened to them in the car and didn't keep insisting on doing whatever you were going to do. And so I think that is the beginning posture to experience what African Americans and Latinos and others go through. Take up a posture of listening, and you'll get an opportunity, I think.
Thank you so much for being with us. I'm just really hoping that God will use this program in a mighty way for people maybe to see things in a different light, in the light of the gospel,
Amen.
In the light of biblical justice,
Amen.
In the light of how Jesus, who was given all authority on heaven and earth, and what did he do with that power? Mm-hmm. He washed the feet of his disciples. He freed the captives. He fed the hungry. That power he did not use for himself. He used it for others. Thank you for everything that you're doing and for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
And thank you for being with us. And we hope that you've learned a lot today, and we hope that you'll join us again right here next week.